Come have a seat on the log at Drumbig Park. I'm doing a little bit of pondering. The waves are really pounding in. We're so lucky, aren't we? We've won the lottery, really, living here, in the rich world, in the free world, in a place like this. I know I generally tend towards optimism. But of course, a natural extension of that feeling of good fortune and wellness, the yin to the yang, is that worry and even a little bit of despair starts to sink in. Climate change and the runaway train it has become. I get especially down knowing we're not protecting anywhere near enough wildlife habitat in nature. Humanity is simply using far too much of the planet. And don't get me started on the need for redistribution of economic wealth and tax reform and how democracies have been undermined and co-opted by the wealthy and the most well-connected. Yeah, okay, I know I'm being a bit of a downer here. Sorry about that. It's the seeming hopelessness of it all, and I look around for something or someone to lean on, and I am so glad I know Gabriola and Fay Weller.
We need to not feel like it belongs to economists and bankers and so on. No. It belongs to us. It's our lives.
That's Fay right there. Spend a little bit of time with Fay, and you can quickly see that she radiates, beyond her gentle and good-humored disposition, a deeply composed and unwavering determination and hope that humanity can turn things around. I'm your host, Ken Gurr, and welcome to Straight Outta Gabriola. We're calling this episode Groundswell, and it features Fay Weller in conversation with me on a spring afternoon on the veranda at her house. We're going to talk about social change and the power and willingness to work at making change happen for the good of your community and beyond. And more to that, we're going to be talking with Fay about a book that she co-authored with Mary Wilson, another Islander, called Changemakers, Embracing Hope, Taking Action, and Transforming the World. It was published in 2018 by New Society Publishers, which is perhaps North America's premier social and environmental literature producers, headquartered right here on Gabriola. And a little bit more about Fay. After her career in provincial government, working on policy and program work around poverty reduction, the green economy, and other social change files, and then raising her family, Fay left the city for Gabriola about 14 years ago. And she now lives here with her partner Bob on a lovely old homestead from the 1880s that they've restored and cared for and have done energy efficiency upgrades on. She jumped right into community life here, bringing all her energy and organizing skill set to volunteer projects, working on social and sustainability issues in our community. So we started our conversation with looking at the work of Sustainable Gabriola, the informal yet highly active grassroots roundtable for sharing ideas about community needs and priorities, and then figuring out what and who can do something to help. Bit more on that later, and more on the book. Let's get started. Come and join us on the veranda. On the story of Sustainable Gabriola and what came out of it. Could you give me this, like the Coles Notes version of how it all started? And I know there's a real core of people that really drove that and kept that going.
So I think Islands Trust, brought in someone from Whistler to talk about what they were doing around sustainability indicators and so on, and invited a number of the community members to be part of that conversation. What came out of that was that a number of people said, great, the Whistler's doing it that way, but guess what? We want to have a Gabriola model. We want to do it our way. Thank you very much. And so a group of people kind of started the conversation about what that would look like. And how it initially started out was we had different people that offered to kind of take the lead on water or take the lead on food or take the lead on those different things. And then we had a visioning session where we had we invited people from the community. I think we had about 180 people there. Maybe we had quite a few people that came and took part in the conversations and wrote things around what they felt and so on. So that formed the basis for the conversations. And then we started monthly gatherings, which really were about a number of things. One was kind of a networking. So Sustainable Gabriola, we made a conscious decision not to be an organization. We wanted it to be more about, there are a lot of organizations on the island, and how can we all have conversations together. So let's have conversations about what we're all doing. That was one component. A second component was, how can we, if someone's got a great idea, and some of the ideas that came out of the visioning forum, for example, the cycle paths, so we need to figure out a way to have better cycle paths on the island.
Bicycle safety, network, the whole thing.
All of that, And so arising out of that idea comes forward, then the people sitting around the table and the people that might be out in the community that are interested. So it comes up at Sustainable Gabriola, we have conversations about how do we move it forward, then that group goes off and makes it happen and comes back and talks about it with the group and gets ideas. So it's kind of an incubator of ideas, and it's also a kind of let's take action. So one time we had a little video about Make It Fairs, about Fix It Fairs and Make It Fairs, and a few people sitting around at that meeting said, okay, let's take it on, and that's why we now have the Fix It Fairs happening.
That's right,
so,
and the tool
library, then arose out of that.
All of that.
And Gertie, a lot of the conversations about Gertie
which
kind
is
of came
community bus project,
community bus, exactly. So and that's really, Sustainable Gabriola is there as a place, and anyone can come.
Yes.
Anyone can come and sit at and put something on the agenda and say, I want to talk about X.
Yeah.
And how do we make this happen? So right now there's conversation, and it arose out of the election process. People were saying, it'd be great if we had more ways in which we can have conversations with our elected officials, and do it in a way that's driven by community. And so a number of people suggested the town hall concept.
Right.
So now there's a group that were part of Sustainable Gabriola that said, well, let's kind of think about this, and we'll bring it back and see what makes sense in terms of having a Gabriola-style town hall, and we might not even call it town hall, because that might not fit.
Exactly. Yeah, so also the community visioning came out of that,
That's
too.
Right,
wasn't
exactly,
it?
yes, very much.
Where, again, it was a situation where, which I find is fascinating with all of the stuff that Sustainable Gabriola has come out of, is that initially you get this kind of, almost ground, staking, where certain government people would go, well, you know what, that's our job. That's what we do. But to say, well, no, we're competent, we'll go ahead, we'll do this process, you can be a part of it, and then understand why you're getting involvement and why people are buying into the process, and maybe it will help move things along a little quicker so it becomes more like a collaborative partnership thing.
That's right. And it also is the idea that government doesn't actually get to tell us what to do. We actually can decide what to do, and great if they can respond and support, and great if they can do what will move it along in terms of regulations, but we don't have to feel stopped because government says, oh no, that's our jurisdiction, or that's our area. I think as a community we need to say, well, actually, this is what we want to have and what we want to do. So I think there's that energy is part of the Sustainable Gabriola conversations.
Now, before Fay gets into more detail about some of the initiatives that came from Sustainable Gabriola and the Roundtable Working Group, I want to mention here that this kind of grassroots community people power approach, where, to be blunt, citizens basically are saying to government, we see this as a priority and we're not going to wait around for you to do it, so you can join us if you like. While there are several other examples of that here on Gabriola, they are success stories that other communities have studied and learned from. A few big ones: the Gabriola Commons, 26 acres of land right in the heart of the village, where sustainability, community, and agriculture meet. It's a peaceful country mosaic of rich ecosystems, pathways, open vistas, meditative spaces, community gardens, meeting facilities, and a culture festival hub. The Commons was purchased and is now operated completely by the citizens of the island, with its own land rezoning, which was a Canadian first. The island's state-of-the-art $1.5 million community health centre was completely built by volunteer labour and community fundraising. Then there is also the Multidisciplinary Healthcare Collaborative, run as a roundtable of medical and health professionals that organized themselves to practice integrated patient care. Now let's join Fay again with some more examples of Sustainable Gabriola co-op initiatives and the ideas and her PhD research that would become the book Changemakers.
And a couple of things that came out of that too as well were cooperatives. A heat pump program, is that part of, or does that just get folded into the cooperative? Or I'm trying to understand.
Okay, so the cooperative, I'll maybe start at the beginning with that.
Let's start. Okay.
Because Jan Pullinger brought the idea of cooperatives to the Sustainable Gabriola meeting. And a number of people got quite excited about that. Mm-hmm. And so started to kind of say, okay, how do we start to create a cooperative culture on Gabriola where cooperatives can be developed? And so there was a big community meeting where I think there were about 80 people, and we had conversations about the different kinds of potential co-ops that could be developed.
Yeah. And there's such a wide variety that you can do, right?
Exactly. You can do whatever with cooperatives. It's a different way of organizing as opposed to, it's an energy or just that, right?
That's right, yeah.
So 3 co-ops were developed out of that. One is the Gabriola Co-op Network, which was really that kind of initial developing group that promoted it, so that then turned into a co-op, which has as members co-ops on the island. The second one was the Community Investment Co-op, and the third one was the Empower Co-op, which is the one you're talking about.
Right.
And what happened there is a number of the energy initiatives on the island kind of all came together, plus we kind of added a little bit. Yeah. So what was Gabe Energy folded, and that became
part
entered
of the
into
Empower Cooperative.
Empower Cooperative, and the focus has moved from selling residential solar to actually doing community projects. So whether it be on the roofs of Gyro or wherever, there is the idea of doing community projects and potentially having individuals in the community that might want to invest in a solar panel and then get the return on investment on that. Then there's also the biodiesel as part of that.
Right.
The biodiesel that gets made for the bus.
Right.
Gertie,
community the bus, right? Oh.
And there's also the heat pump program that you mentioned, where heat pumps which are bought at wholesale prices, or basically that's passed on to anyone on the island who wants one, and there's over 680 now
that's something,
as a result.
When you think about, I think there's
2,000 buildings.
Yeah,
I know,
what a quick market penetration that is, and such a and because it's an offer that's too good to refuse because of you're getting it at wholesale prices. Plus, I think the installation cost is really reasonable.
Yeah, there's someone on the island that's So it works really well. Yeah. And when you think about the return, I think people get their money back, basically, in what they put in 3 years. Yeah. And there's also usually a grant for it, which is around $1,000 right now, I know. So that, and when people buy it at that wholesale price, they also put $200 towards Sustainable Gabriola, or any initiative coming out of Sustainable Gabriola, really. So... Then the fourth component is we're also a dealer of Goal Zero products, which are solar panels and batteries that you can hook up to the solar panels, and LED lights that you can use, and so on. So trying in different ways. And also education. So we're going to have a session at the library talking about what you do in a power outage.
Now, did all of those initiatives, is that what formed the seed of the idea to get into the book, to do the research of Changemakers with Mary Wilson? Or, is it part of the experiences of how we're doing stuff here? Or was that a whole different trajectory? What got you going on researching and doing the book Changemakers?
So... several things. And it started quite a while ago because... I decided to go back and do my PhD.
Right.
And I started out by doing it, focusing on Islands Trust and kind of how do you, innovative and what happens on these islands and so on.
Yeah.
And as I kind of moved through the PhD coursework and research, I started to see that actually change was happening because of people and groups getting together and making things happen. And really it had very little to do with government, whether it be local government or provincial, or it was all about people who said, hey, I want to change. So what I did for the PhD was interview 40 people amongst the Gulf Islands. And so a number of those stories are in the book, and some of the concepts are in the book. And so how it became a joint with Mary was Mary and I said, okay, let's support each other in doing our writing, because we were both interested in writing something. I was going to do it around the change making initiatives. She was interested in the concept of learning and change. And so we kind of had some support coffees and so on, and realized that we actually had some similar concepts and that the two worked really well together. And so the book is about some of the social change stuff that was part of the PhD, but it's written in a way that's fun. And it's also about the learning change and how do you learn change and what is that all about in terms of compassion and wisdom and kind of cutting through the different ways and the dualities of different ways of seeing things. And so that's how the book came about, was this combination of the two.
Do you think, in your research for this too, there's always the idea that every generation thinks they're exceptional, and so we're the generation that's going to change everything and it's going to be great. But do you think that there is really a groundswell out there? Like there is, we're in another time of, I know young people on this island I've talked to, and hopefully another future episode I'll be talking to a lot of people that are new here or that grew up here, and they're younger millennials or in the 20s, and to get their perspective on everything. But I have heard from 2 or 3 that said, I feel like we're in another renaissance. Like this is the make or break time for a lot of things, and that there is such a groundswell of desire for change, and that we are more networked than ever before, and so that can help with the right catalysts to accelerate that. And I guess a case in point would be something where you flashpoints. Obviously the Occupy movement had started up, and we see most recently the Gilets jaunes in France, where it's around a whole bunch of things with taxation. But they're at this point where they're saying enough is enough. We want change in a way that. So, do you think we're in a time that is?
I think we're very much in a time. I think that generation of the 20s and 30s and into the 40s, they know that climate change is serious. They know the way in which governments are responding is not. It's not really going to ensure that the stuff around climate change will actually help. And I think there's not the buy-in that there was in some previous generations about government actually looking after us or doing the right things. Maybe I think that there is a sense of recognizing their own agency in making the change happen.
Here's Gabriolan Victor Anthony playing a lovely little gem called The Last of Amanda. was Victor. That song was written by one of his old high school pals named Wirt Courtney many years ago. Victor recorded it for his final album in 2015 called Mystery Loves Company. Islanders know Victor as the kindly gentleman Gabriolan by way of Tennessee. For years, he was a core member of Sustainable Gabriola and dedicated countless hours to projects like the Cycle Paths, Gabriola Commons, for which he organized several benefit concerts, raising thousands of dollars towards the purchase of the land for the community. Victor passed away in December 2018, and he's dearly missed by his wife Joelle and this island. Here we are back on the veranda with the rain falling. Okay, so let's look at the ways. The final section of Changemakers is you've got a kind of a workbook format or a guide to helping people. So could you maybe touch on what you think the main things in the toolbox or the main things that groups should look at
when they're want to actually make something happen?
Yeah.
I think one of the key ones is integrity. So it's the idea that people, instead of looking outwards and saying, what does society say is successful? We need to look inwards at what our values are. And so when I was talking to people that had been involved in change making, so many of them talked about the need to get back to what their values were. To, okay, if I believe in this, then I go from that place, as opposed to going from the place of, oh, this other community's doing this, that's kind of interesting. It's more about, we're doing this because this is what we believe in.
Right.
We know this is what fits for us. So that's integrity is one key in there. Another key is what I call in there transformative spaces.
Right.
And it's the idea of there being spaces where different stories are being told.
Okay.
And so it's about putting yourself in those places where there are different stories and recognizing that there are different stories out there. So one of the stories in the book is about Anna Bauer, and she's in the kitchen, and she is saying, I want to continue using organic, the eggs that I get from down the street, rather than having to go over to Nanaimo and get something, get the inspected eggs. And so, first of all, she's coming from a place of integrity. She's saying, this is what it is. When the health inspector comes in, those around her recognize that the story has shifted. So the authority on food and protection of our health is not actually with the inspector, it's actually with Anna. So they're seeing that there's a different story happening. So I think that's the other piece that when people are making change happen, it's that don't accept the stories that have been going on for a while. There are other stories, and let's look at what those other stories are. There's integrity, there's the transformative spaces, and the third one is just like when we see, the old woman and young woman in the thing, and all you can see is the old, all you can see is the old, and then all of a sudden you see the young woman. Yeah. It's recognizing that those moments, it's finding those moments where we actually see how there can be a different way of seeing the same picture sometimes.
That goes beyond, then that's getting also, it's hard for a group that has to get beyond your own filters and your ideology, and you're putting something in the middle of the table and saying, that's it. Can we look at this in a new way?
Let's look at it, right. Let's really rethink. And so I think in some ways when change is happening, it needs to involve all three of those. And when I talk to people, it was funny, I'd say, tell me the story about the change that you've done in this community, because I've heard amazing things about it. And then they would start right at the point of that moment when they all of a sudden saw something differently, just like the old woman and young woman. And that's where they'd go to first before they started talking about the actual change that had happened. So, and in this community, I think change happens and agency happens because we've seen others do it, for one thing. I think there has been enough people moved here because they didn't want to be part of a society they disagreed with. And so there was already a thinking outside the box. And then when they put gyro up, or when they Gertie happened, as people started to see that we could just do these things, then more and more people started doing those things. More and more people started kind of saying, yes, we can make change happen. We don't have to wait, and so on.
Yeah,
it's
a self-reinforcing thing.
Exactly.
Kind of an upward spiral of, we can do this, we believe we can do this, and now we're starting to prove the concept. Let's just keep going.
Exactly.
And what else can we do?
Exactly. And I think there's a couple of other pieces, actually, that are the broader pieces, too. It's that with anything that goes on, there's going to be a different purposes that might clash.
Right.
And there needs to be kind of a working through those purposes. And so if people know ahead of time, that's going to happen. That's part of kind of moving forward on something. And there's compassion involved in where everyone's coming from. That also helps me move things forward. Right. And the other piece is this, what I call the spiral, because what people talked about is how it felt like it was taking forever at first. And then it started speeding up as people started to buy in. But at first it felt like, oh my goodness, no, this is never going to happen. And all these regulations and all this reaction from different people. And then as time went on, people bought in and it started to happen. And again, because people have seen that happen on the island with a number of things, I think they feel like they can move forward with it without having high expectations about saying, we need to have this happen and it will happen tomorrow, because they recognize things take time. They recognize there needs to be that kind of process that happens.
Well, on this spring day, as you could hear in the background, the rain started to fall more heavily. And that's Henrietta you also heard. She's the last surviving chicken of Bob's and Fay's after the ravens sadly took their toll. She decided to get out of the rain, and she settled in right under our feet. So Fay and I packed up and moved indoors for a nice hot tea and to continue our conversation. And coincidentally this day, another core member of Sustainable Gabriola, Diane Dunsmore-Farley, well, she was giving a talk at the Roxy Theatre about her PhD research, dealing with how small communities respond to resource development pressures. While the tea is steeping for Fay and I, here's what Diane had to say about the common threads found here on Gabriola and what any group or community needs to find their own power and voice. In your work that you've done and the research that you've done for your dissertation, were you able to pull out, like, why is Gabriola so good at some of the stuff that we have been doing, like the Health and Wellness Collaborative?
Yeah.
What are the
I've got a whole section in a chapter on what makes that work.
Any top of mind things that
so it's in the section where I talked about free range governance and the willingness to not be boxed in by structures and formal systems, right? So there's a whole non-hierarchical and desire to have a consensus, to create spaces where you can look at critical issues that is not formal, doesn't owe anything to anyone, so you don't have to register with the Societies Act, and it doesn't look for money, so it's not dependent on capital. I mean, there's a whole bunch of qualities that are emblematic of those kinds of activities. Mm-hmm. Now, at some point, when you're doing the Gertie thing, well, Gertie was like an idea for a long time, right? And so the early year or two of Gertie's development was not formally structured. It was a group of people getting together and envisioning what that might be. Yeah. Eventually, they got the attention of the RDN and got them to agree that if they were able to prove certain things, and even then, they kept their structure fairly minimalist.
Wow.
Yeah, so yeah, there are.
So we seem to have developed this community has developed a knack for it.
Yeah, I would say.
And it's a collection of individuals that you think of the makeup and the persistence to kind of see it through.
Yeah, so that's it. Persistence,
Yeah.
right? A belief in possibility, incrementalism, willingness to do and then do again and then do again, right? I mean, it's all of those things, right?
What I've noticed is, for sure, a trend in, if you could, extract for a PhD, the amount of articles being written about changing capitalism, right? The changes that need to happen, universal basic income, that are bubbling out again into people's consciousness. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the United States as a congresswoman who's, talking about the Green New Deal. And so there's this true groundswell in the consciousness of people, and everyone has this sense that it's broken and we have to fix it.
Yeah. Part of the co-op thing was also about, we need to start creating a different economy. And the way we can do that is through cooperative and through cooperatively owning this island. So the commons, is it let's not have it be something that is owned by the owner of the grocery store or the someone that owns tons of the land for profit purposes. Let's actually start owning it as a community, because that's going to change the economy. There's a chapter in the book about economy, and it focuses on cooperatives, because that is about the community owning it, and it's about changing the values of economy, right?
Yeah. Because cooperatives, it's within our system right now. It's something that we can use within our capitalist market economy to make it work for us and have it as something that distributes value more widely. Is that there's that, as well as, have you done much looking into universal basic income or guaranteed annual income a little bit in it?
I've always felt that makes total sense to do something like that. And I think it's one of the things that when I was doing the research as well, that captured me was a book by Gibson Graham, where they talk about, it's called The End of Capitalism as We Know It.
Okay.
And really what it says is, quite honestly, there's more labor that goes into things that are outside of capitalism than those things that are capital. So let's start acknowledging that, and let's start recognizing, and a lot of it's unpaid, and yet it's such an incredible resource for our communities, for the people living in a community or a country, right? Yeah. So why not do something like guaranteed annual income? So it allows people to be able to carry out those community supportive things in a way that they might not be able to in the current system. When I was in government, it was looked at briefly, and then passed over, and they're talking about it again now. Let's hope that there's enough energy to actually start to put it into place. I think there's a pilot planned, but
because again, another thing that I see and that has been with my kids who are adults, in their 20s, is that they they feel the crush of the cost of everything, and they're caught with university debt and trying to cobble together contract work and doing work for very low wage comparatively. And they look around and go, they feel like giving up. And then you kind of think, well, something like a guaranteed annual income would smooth out those rough spots, right? And make a person go, okay, well, now I can take a breather because at least my rent is covered.
Yes.
A little bit of groceries.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
And I think it's probably those expense factors are also probably part of the reason the millennials are shifting away from the capitalist system and so on, because the things cost, they're out of their reach. So why even bother trying to pretend that you want to get something like that? Why not actually just think, okay, let me sit with my friends and figure out how we can do this. Let's have a community garden together, at the local. There's community gardens spreading up everywhere. So let's find other ways of doing, and we don't, let's get all of our clothes from the local recycling area or whatever, right? There's ways in which I think the millennials are embracing that, which is part of that shift.
Fay mentioned the excellent book by Gibson Graham, The End of Capitalism as We Know It, and I want to tell you about a couple of great and entertaining reads I tripped upon that dig a little deeper into the broader systems change stuff as well. Economist Robert Reich's Saving Capitalism for the Many, Not the Few. And if you are leaning more towards erasing the whole works and starting over, then the book Bullshit Jobs by London School of Economics professor David Graeber. He's an avowed anarchist and anti-statist, but says if there's one thing that he could get behind, it's the fundamental moral and conceptual upending of how and what work we value. Caring for your sick or elderly family member, volunteer community and charity work, working in the arts, going to school to learn more. He calls it the revolution of the caring class. You gotta like that. You combo that up with the Extinction Rebellion movement and whew.
We can look at what's happening here and indeed in many other communities in the world. I kind of worry that could we also just tend to hunker down, like in our own, literally here in this island and metaphorical islands, and just go, okay, let's build our world in our own little safe space and not look at the rest and start to say, we gotta shake up the whole system. Do you see that there's an application for changemakers to look at the big stuff and deal with the big issues, and I guess what I'm trying to say is being more, I guess, politically plugged in to changing all the real big things that we're letting slide by, perhaps because we're trying to make our own little world just perfect.
The global and the local.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a possibility for people to hunker down, but it's not what I'm seeing with the people that are involved in the change-making stuff.
Right.
So, for example, what I'm seeing is people reaching out to other communities and linking with other communities and together with other communities advocating for change in different ways. And I think that is maybe that's the hope piece as well, isn't it? Right. That's the idea that we're not alone, we're not islands, so to speak, really, right?
What do you think the future holds? Do you feel, I mean, I think I know what the answer, but you feel, you don't feel pessimistic, do you?
Well, actually, and part of the subtitle of our book includes Embracing Hope.
Right.
Because, and yet at the beginning we say, it isn't so much about hope as it is about saying we're in the world as it is. We can kind of feel defeated and stop doing anything. Or we can say, what kind of life do we want to create? What kind of life do we want the future to offer to whoever? And let's move towards that. And, there may be problems that the way in which we're living will be challenged. But what we're doing is even moving towards something. Say there was an earthquake, or there was such a weather disaster that we were alone on this island without the same kind of connections that we had. Well, the way that we're if you live with integrity and you live from that place of value and caring, your life is actually pretty well set up to be able to manage even much better in disaster than if you maintain the traditional way of living that the consumerist and we buy everything off island and so on. Mm-hmm. So I think the hope is about not saying, oh, the world is going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. The hope is about saying we are living in a way that we believe in, and whatever happens, this is the best way of moving forward. Mm-hmm. So I think that's...
Which is kind of an adaptation, like in some ways too.
It's kind of an adaptation, but it's kind of saying, I want to live the way I want the future to be.
Yeah.
And I want to provide avenues so others feel supported in doing that as well. And so the more of us that start to do that, the more hope there is, I think. Every one of us is linked to others, a whole pile of others. And that's how change starts to happen, is because your link with someone in Vietnam, or my link with someone in Australia, or my link with someone on Salt Spring Island. It can be close, it can be far away. All of those links and the sharing of these ideas and the sharing of ways in which we can be hopeful together and that we can have fun together, because it has to be fun too.
It does.
Bottom line.
Oh, that's great, Fay. Well, thanks for the tea and the time.
Welcome.
Much appreciated, and for sitting here and enjoying a nice spring afternoon that went from kind of sun to rain.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the show. Please have a look at our website or Facebook page, and I'd be really interested to get your comments about the show and what your thoughts are about social change and community action. And don't forget to share us on your social media networks. We'd really appreciate it. And if you like, please go on Stitcher or Apple Podcasts and leave a rating. We'd appreciate it. Until next time, goodbye for now.